Chapter 83, Jonah Historically Regarded. Reference was made to the historical story of Jonah and the whale in the preceding chapter. Now, some Nantucketers rather distrust this historical story of Jonah and the whale. But then there were some skeptical Greeks and Romans who, standing out from the Orthodox pagans of their time, equally doubted the story of Hercules and the whale, and Arion and the dolphin, and yet their doubting of these traditions did not make those traditions one whit less facts for all that. One old Sag whaleman's chief reason for this questioning of the Hebrew story was this. He had one of those quaint old-fashioned Bibles embellished with curious unscientific plates, one of which represented Jonah's whale with two spouts in his head, a peculiarity only true with respect to the species of Leviathan, the right whale, and the varieties of that order, concerning which the fishermen have this saying, a penny roll would choke him. This swallow is so very small. But to this, Bishop Jebb's anticipative answer is ready. It is not necessary, hints the bishop, that we consider Jonah as tombed in the whale's belly, but as temporarily lodged in some part of his mouth. And this seems reasonable enough in the good bishop. For truly, the right whale's mouth would accommodate a couple of whist tables, and comfortably seat all the players. Possibly, too, Jonah might have ensconced himself in a hollow tooth. But on second thoughts, the right whale is toothless. Another seat reason which Sag Harbor, he went by that name, urged for his want of faith in the matter of the prophet, was something obscure in the reference to his incarnated body and the whale's gastric juices. But this objection likewise falls to the ground, because a German exegist supposes that Jonah must have been taking refuge in the floating body of a dead whale, even as the French soldiers in the Russian campaign have turned their dead horses into tents and crawled into them. Besides, it has been divined by other continental commentators that when Jonah was thrown overboard from the Joppa ship, he straightway effected his escape to another vessel nearby, some vessel with a whale for a figurehead, and I would add, possibly called the whale, as some craft are nowadays christened the shark, the gull, and the eagle. Nor have there been any wanting learned exegists who have opined that the whale mentioned in the book of Jonah merely meant a life preserver, an inflated bag of wind which the endangered prophet swam to, and so was saved from a watery doom. Poor Sag Harbor, therefore, seems worsted all round. But he had still yet another reason for his want of faith. It was this, if I remember right. Jonah was swallowed up by the whale in the Mediterranean Sea, and after 3 days he was vomited up somewhere within 3 days' journey of Nineveh, a city on the Tigris, very much more than 3 days' journey across from the nearest point of the Mediterranean coast. How is that? But there was no other way for the whale to land the prophet within that short distance of Nineveh. Yes, he might have carried him round by the way of Cape of Good Hope, but not to speak of the passage through the whole length of the Mediterranean, and another passage up the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. Such a supposition would involve the complete circumnavigation of all Africa, and in 3 days, not to speak of the Tigris waters near the site of Nineveh being too shallow for any whale to swim in. Besides, this story of Jonah's weathering of the Cape of Good Hope at so early a day would wrest the honor of the discovery from that great headland from Bartholomew Diaz as reported discoverer, and so make modern history a liar. But all these foolish arguments of old Sag Harbor only evinced his foolish pride of reason, a thing still more reprehensible in him, seeing that he had but little learning except what he picked up from the sun and the sea. I say it only shows his foolish impious pride and abominable devilish rebellion against the reverend clergy. For by a Portuguese Catholic priest, this very idea of Jonah going to Nineveh via the Cape of Good Hope was advanced as a singular magnification of the general miracle, and so it was. Besides, to this day, the highly enlightened Turks devoutly believe in the historical story of Jonah, and some 3 centuries ago an English traveller in Old Harris's Voyages speaks of a Turkish mosque built by the honor of Jonah, in which the mosque was miraculously a lamp that burned without any oil. This is the end of chapter 83. Now, the story of Jonah and the whale is one of the more fantastic ones in the Bible. It's hard to believe that someone was swallowed up by a great fish, by a whale, by a leviathan. So it's one of those things. It's like, it's hard to believe, but if you believe in any suspension of reality and a miracle, it's a reasonable-ish one to believe. Now, he talks about Joppa, which is in the coast of Lebanon, which is north of Israel. So that's on the east coast of the Mediterranean. So in order to get to Nineveh, which is towards the headwaters of the Tigris, which is in Iraq, to go by land, it's several hundred miles and several days walk. Or you can go all the way across the Mediterranean, like a couple thousand miles, 10,000 odd miles down around the south coast of Africa, 10,000 odd miles up the coast, and then several hundred miles upriver, which is just like not going to happen. But that's kind of like him looking at a mistranslation of the Bible or misunderstanding the King James translation. So the King James translation is wonderful in a lot of ways. I mean, it's beautiful, it's poetic. Shakespeare is alleged to have written some of the Psalms, and it's quite possibly did. But there's some things which are hard to understand in it. And it wasn't a 3 days journey to Nineveh. It was a 3 days journey across Nineveh. So Nineveh was this huge, I mean, imagine a city it takes you 3 days to walk across. Omaha is 10 miles side to side, 10 miles top to bottom, give or take, which is a huge city. Detroit's just like that. It's another huge, huge city. And 15 miles, 10 to 20 miles is a good day's walk. I averaged about 15 to 20 when I was walking in Europe. My highest day was 30. So, I mean, let's say you're dealing with crowds, have to find a place to sleep, have to find food to eat, have to deal with all of that stuff. 10 miles is still not a bad day of travel. So imagine the size of a city. It takes you 3 days to walk from one end to the other. And this is Nineveh. This was an Assyrian capital. At one point, it was the largest city in the world. So, I mean, it's just this huge, huge place. And so it's not 3 days journey to walk to Nineveh. It's 3 days journey to walk across Nineveh. And in the Bible, Jonah walks in one day, says, "You're doomed! Bye." And then goes, hangs out. And that's... The book of Jonah is kind of awesome, and there's a couple of little stories in there, and Jonah going, "Woe is me." But, and then Jonah getting his comeuppance at the end, and God saying, here's more ways where you were wrong than you really realized. But, that's Jonah and the whale, and I may do a whole video on that. Anyway, so Jonah and the whale, and talked about a miracle of a lamp burning without oil. And this is one of those standard miracles. This is one of those miracles that seems to happen a lot, where there's these lamps that just burn without oil. And maybe some of them are shenanigans, but it's a fairly common miracle. Once again, Hanukkah is all about the lamp burning for 8 days when they didn't have oil to last that long. So it's lamps burning without oil is a fairly common miracle. People miraculously being healed, divine visions, but lamps burning without oil is one of those things. It's like, that's one of the fairly standard things. So you have, this guy who has a Bible with some badly printed pictures in it and some not very accurate ones. And that was common back in the day. Actually, it's still common. If you're to take a look at book covers, you look at the cover of a book and you go, where does this ever happen in the book? And you read through the book, it never happens in the book. or the characters are totally unlike they're described in the book. It's like you look at the cover, it's like the illustrator didn't even read the thing. So very much so with this, it's like, okay, Jonah was swallowed by a whale and it looks like a giant dragon, or Jonah was swallowed by a whale and two spouts. Well, two spouts, as he says, is could have been a right whale. But nobody knows what the beast that swallowed Jonah looks like. I mean, Jonah didn't tell anybody. He said, swallowed by a fish. It's just not good. So that's that.